Hi folks, Serdar here with Dev with Serdar, and welcome to part 3 of our series about setting up a Django project in Python in 2023. In the first 2 episodes of this series, we set up a basic Django web project with a couple of basic routes and a data backend. And now in this installment, we're going to build the parts of the app that display data from the database and take input from the user to store new data through a web form. So let's start by taking a look at the views.py file for our Django application, which is the postboard app, a simple message board system. In the previous installment, the index route that we had did not do very much. It just returned a static hello world message. And now I've got some code here that actually makes it do something. It reads records from the Django apps database and returns the data as an HTML page. So let's step through how this works. You may remember in the last episodes how we have a Django model, basically a Python class, as our interface to what's in the database. We have the model post to represent a table of posts made to the message board. Now, when we want to run a query against that table and do something with the results, we use methods on the post object, like this, .objects to obtain all of the objects in post, and then order by to sort those objects by some column. In this case, the column is date, and we use this leading minus to indicate that we want to sort in descending order with most recent first. And last, we have a slice operation, which takes only the first 7 objects from the query results. This is basically a primitive form of pagination for the results. Now, there's lots more methods and operations that you can perform on Django database models, but this should give you an idea of how a query works in general. So for the rest of this function, we're going to iterate through the results and construct an HTML string from the data in it. We get the data in the date and post text attributes for each row in the query, and we format a string with them. And then we return the whole thing back to the client using HTTP response. I've already fired up the test server for this app, so I'm just going to switch over there and navigate to that page and show you the results. Now, there is one big drawback to returning results this way by manually constructing strings. It is clumsy. Anything bigger than the most trivial responses gets really unwieldy to deal with. And that's why Django and many other web frameworks have a system for rendering and returning HTML programmatically to the client, a templating system, as it's called. The basic idea behind a Django template works like this. You write a mix of HTML and some programmatic code that is interpreted by Django, and Django takes all of that, returns it as HTML, and sends it back to the client. It's easier to write a larger, more complex output to the client this way. So here's the template that I'm going to be using for the next iteration of this function. And as you can see, most of it looks like a conventional web page's HTML, except that we've got these elements in these double curly braces, or in these curly braces and percent signs. The double curly braces are places where variable values are inserted, like in an F string in Python, and the other brace blocks are inline code statements. A lot of the way code logic works in a Django template will resemble what we do in Python. It just has slightly different syntax. For instance, this block here, this is the code where I loop through the database records and insert them into the HTML. So we have this for in statement, which resembles what we have in Python, and then we have this matching end for to indicate the end of the block. And we need this since we don't use Python's indentation for syntax in templates. So everything inside this block gets rendered in the document multiple times, once for each object in the loop. It's the same as when we used a for loop to build up a string in the previous example, only we're doing it right in our HTML. So here's how we'll use all of this in our code, in the new version of the function we're going to write. We get the data objects as before, and then we use the loader function from Django's template module to read that template from disk. Then we have to give the variable references in the template something that they can refer to. So for instance, in the template, we have a reference to an object named last posts, but by default, templates don't have access to any of the data in our application. We have to grant that access explicitly. This name won't refer to anything until we do that. So we do that by way of a dictionary that works like a namespace for our template. So we construct a dictionary with that name, last posts, and the object that we want to correspond to it. And then we pass that along to the template. The template's render method returns all this as HTML, and that gets sent back up to the client. I've already constructed a route to point to this version of the function, so I'm going to go back to the test server and go to that route. And as you can see, we have some very nicely formatted HTML output for our data. Now, you'll notice one of the things that we have on this page is a small form for submitting new posts. And if we go back to the template, you can see where we have that in the template here. It's nothing fancy, it's just a text area and a submit button. But I want to use this as an example for how we would take input from the user and add it to the database. So first off, let's look at some of the elements in this form that may seem unfamiliar. Django gives us a slew of utilities that can be used in things like forms, and one of them is a standard way to prevent cross-site request forgeries, or CSRF attacks. This is a common vulnerability in a web application, and Django gives you a way to prevent it. So we have this variable, CSRF token, and Django provides that to us as a way to ensure that the form we're submitting is in fact a form it generated. And if you don't include a CSRF token in a form, Django will complain about it and our app will not work, which is actually a good thing. We don't want to submit bad data. So if we take this token out and we go back to our application and we try to submit something with that form, boom, we get this error message, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to have something with no CSRF token in it. Now you'll notice we have this curious statement here in our form tag, this URL and this name post new. This is one of a number of built-in functions that Django provides for templates. The URL tag, which renders the URL of a given route that we've referenced by name. See, remember how we had names for the different routes in our application defined in urls.py? What this tag does is it looks up that name, in this case post new, finds the URL that corresponds to that named route, and inserts that URL here. So this is a handy way for us to point the form's submission action at some URL that's defined programmatically. If we ever have to change the actual URL where this form gets submitted to, we don't have to touch the templates. We just have to change one reference to it universally through our app. You'll notice also I've added a route with that name pointing to this function views.postNew. That is the function that handles the form submissions for this page. It is in general a good idea to have things like form submissions handled in their own functions so the logic for them doesn't get mixed up with other things. Now, the way we work with a form submission in Django is pretty straightforward. Every route function always takes in a first argument that is a request object, an object that holds information about the current request. We can index into that object's post attribute, as we would a dictionary, to get a form field by name. So once we get the text from the form submission, we can create a new post in the database with that text and save it. And then we send the user back to the original URL, the one that does the display, using a redirect. This reverse function, by the way, from the Django.urls module, takes the name of some view and gets its URL in much the same way the URL tag worked in the template. So if we load this route and we type in some message here and we hit post, we have it submitted by way of a new route, saved in the database, and then we're directed back to the original page to see the results. And we can do this indefinitely. Now, there's a lot still missing. For one, we don't do any authentication of the user to determine whether or not they have the right to post. Anybody could log in, anybody could access the site and post. But the basic mechanisms should be pretty clear. And many of the individual pieces and behaviors of how Django handles things also should be clear, like form submissions, new database entries, and redirects. So in the next episode, we're going to look at making this app a little more genuinely useful by ensuring only valid users can post. And that's it for now. If you liked it, leave a comment below, and don't forget to follow Dev with Serdar and InfoWorld on Facebook, YouTube, and InfoWorld.com.